So I'm going to read it slowly, and it's just beautiful when you sent it to me. So this is on the topic of If the Blind Led the Blind by Ernest Holmes. He wrote in Living the Science of Mind, page 388. Whenever there is an emotional blind spot, there will be an intellectual blind spot. This means that we cannot think with truthful clarity about things that we are too emotionally affected by. Jesus understood this, and that is why he said that if the blind led the blind, they will both fall into the ditch. Interesting. This is where many of our theological and political conflicts come from. This is why people are prone to say that they alone are right, or their system of thought alone is right. They have not yet gotten a clearance back to the fundamental proposition that God is one, and that every man is an incarnation of the same God. Therefore, intolerance and harshness, unkindness and criticism, coldness and indifference are projected. This is one of the tricks that the mind plays on us. When we understand these things, we shall become more tolerant, more kind, more compassionate, because we shall realize that we are all on the pathway of evolution, not of spirit, which is already perfect, but of the mind, which is so often blindly groping in the dark. It's powerful, isn't it? So let's read the affirmation. I know there is nothing to be afraid of in God's world. Fear cannot operate in me. I am a center of confidence, protected by divine love, guided by divine wisdom, and strengthened by divine power. I turn to the people and the leaders of the world everywhere and know that love and the intelligent guidance is directing their thoughts and actions.
Oh, my goodness. So there's a declaration of principles that Ernest Holmes has put forth, and one of them I think is totally applicable today. And it goes like this. We believe that the ultimate goal of life is a complete emancipation from all discord of every nature. And this goal is sure to be attained by all. That's a powerful intention, a lofty intention, we may say to ourselves. And yet, because of the creative nature of who we are, we have the power to place that intention in the field of universal mind and allow the mind of God, the presence of God, to work on our behalf, to bring that into being. And so the discord that we see around us, whether it's in our world or whether it's things that are happening on our planet, it's important to continue to remember that these are opportunities for us to plant a new thought in the universal mind, to hold a higher vision, to set a new cause in motion. Because we, as individualized expressions of the Most High, we, as the children of the Most High, are granted the gift of creation. We are participators in the creative process with the divine. So this happens then, this unfolding of the creative process happens as we all begin to realize that the only thing that's standing in the way of us experiencing this ultimate harmony, this emancipation from discord, is a thought, a belief in separation, a belief that somehow we are separated from the good that is actually present for us in every moment. So I'm reminded that everything
related to our spiritual unfoldment is about subtraction. It's about subtracting, removing, releasing the blind spots, those ideas of us being separate from one another, different from, I mean, we have our uniqueness, yes, but the idea that somehow we're separate from one another. And I'll give you a really good example of that. This was really brought home to me. Sharon Bousquet sent me this videotape of a TV show. And the women were sitting around and discussing, and these were three black women. I can't remember the name of the show, but they sat around. It was a grandmother, mother, and daughter, and they were talking about race relationships and what it was like to be a friend with a white woman, particularly a blonde white woman, and how challenging that was because of their experiences when they were younger. And so one of their stage people came out who was a blonde white woman and said, what can I do? What can I do to bridge this gap? I really want to do this. And there was a lot of resistance and that kind of thing. And then the woman who was the key person brought someone from backstage who was this elderly woman who you could tell was just full of grace. And she had been a school teacher for many years, and they showed a film of her teaching her children. And what she taught her children was that, one of the mistakes that we make is by saying that there are many different races, when really there's one race. There's one human race. And if we can begin to think in those terms, then we can begin to break down the barriers of what separates us. And she pointed out that all of us have the same origin. Some people went north and their skin got lighter, and some stayed in the parts, the more central tropical climates, and their skin became darker. But we are all one race. Don't you love that? One human race. And you should have seen the transformation of the people around the table when they came to that realization. That's right. We really are one. And we hear that over and over again, don't we? We even say that we are one. But to think about what that means on a deeper level is a very powerful thing. We are all brothers and sisters of the Most High, the same universal parent or parents, however you want to look at it, the same universal presence, the same universal Father, Mother, God. So these are the blind spots. These are examples of the blind spots that must be eliminated, released, in order for us to more fully live in harmony together. To allow that thing called grace to flow, that ever-giving nature of the divine, the universe, the presence that wants to give and give and give and give. And it's up to us receive by removing these blind spots. The Hebrew scriptures say, with all thy getting, get understanding. With all thy getting, get understanding. So that's what we're doing. We're stepping into a greater level of understanding of who we are in truth, so that we may live more fully in this state of grace, to be that present place where which grace flows in and it flows out in abundance. So I'm going to be using the words let us be willing, because it's a willingness that helps to remove or release these old patterns of thinking that don't serve us. With all thy getting, get understanding. So let us be willing to understand the nature of ultimate reality. Let us begin there. The nature of ultimate reality. One life, one God, one presence, one source. A life that is perfect right here and right now and individualized as us. And that great source, which is God, is perfect love. Grace ever giving, ever unfolding. And that perfect love is seeking greater expression in, through, and as us as we allow it to take place. Let us also be willing to understand that love or grace can be blocked or inhibited by the activity of the conditioned mind. And I love to use this idea of the conditioned mind, which is our subconscious mind, because I want to take all the guilt out of it. It's part of our human experience to be born into a world that has illusions as part of it, the illusion of separation. It is part of the world to be exposed to the media, to our culture, to what Ernest Holmes called race consciousness. And again, he means human race consciousness, the collective consciousness, ideas that really don't serve, well, they may seem to serve us for a while, but they don't serve us ultimately because they divide us and separate us. So as we begin to understand that this is how the conditioned mind works, and it's there for our survival. Ultimately, that's the reason for it. It has to do with the survival of us on this planet. But then it can get overdone, and it can end up dividing us, and ultimately leading to our demise instead of our survival. So that's where the wisdom of the spirit essence of who we are, that part of us that can observe our thoughts and that can choose to let go of that which doesn't serve and to embrace the higher truth as we are able to understand it. So let us then understand that it's a waste of time to condemn ourselves or others, and instead understand that what we can do to free ourselves. So that's our job, is just to realize how we can free ourselves so we can show up more lovingly and more intentionally as the presence that we choose to be. So that one of the first things we want to do then, this just flows right out of this, is release the tendency to blindly follow the beliefs of others. And that means even the things that I say. It's important that we check in with ourselves, with our hearts, and ask ourselves, is this true for me? Is this true for me? And I love the Byron Katie method of doing it. Anybody recognize Byron Katie? She has a beautiful way of inquiry that's a 4-step process where we can challenge our own thinking. When we have a thought like, so-and-so should be like this, or I should be like this, or they shouldn't do that, whatever. Usually the shoulds and shouldn'ts are a key that we're using erroneous thinking on some level. So what we do is we test it and say, is it true that this should be? And check within ourselves. If we feel stressed by that, it's usually not the truth. If we feel peaceful, then we're tuning into the truth. So, and then if you're still not sure, you say, am I absolutely sure that this is the truth? That's the second question. The third question is, how do I live if I believe this thought? If I believe a thought and it causes stress and discord, it's not serving me. It's not the ultimate truth. And then who would I be without this thought? Who would I be without this thought? Who would you be without thoughts of discord? Peaceful. What else? Relaxed. Joyful. Free. Free. There's a story of a family who was in the kitchen preparing a meal for the holidays. And it was a mother, grandmother, and young child, the daughter of the mother. Anyway, the three of them were preparing the meal together. And the child was noticing that her mother was cutting the ends off of the pot roast before she put them in the pan. And she said, why do you do that, Mom? And so the mother looks at the grandmother and she said, why is it that, you used to do this, why do you do this? And she said, I don't know, go ask Granzy. She's in the she's in the living room. So the child goes and asks Granzy, her great-grandmother. And her great-grandmother said, I don't know why your mother still does that. She said, I used to do it because that was the size of my pan. It's called the pot roast principle. And so, where are we using the pot roast principle in our lives, where we're just simply doing or believing what we were told when we were younger, or what the media tells us, or whatever it is, instead of doing the questioning ourselves? Is this true? Do I really, truly align with this? Because if it causes inner discord, it's not the truth. If it causes stress, it's not the truth. It's not serving you. And when we come back to the truth and when we feel that sense of peace and relaxation, then we know we're on to something. So let's see. So rather than blindly following others, we ask, is this true? And then think about some of the great spiritual masters of all time, Jesus and Gandhi, and their dying words for both of them related to what? Forgiveness. Forgiveness, right. And whoops, I jumped. I made a leap. Let's say that. Now you know what's coming next, but that's okay. So I want to complete this thought. Like, how many battles and wars have happened because people blindly follow a leader who has an agenda that is not in our highest and best? How often has that happened in the past? How often have people, and you can think of the Crusades, going into battle, giving their lives to spread what they thought was the right religion when other people had their own religion already. And, trying to force something on other people when it's maybe not for their highest and best. So this idea of one human family in many expressions is such a powerful thing. We have that beautiful infinity loop that is on the wall to remind us one God, many paths, and for us to honor the paths of other people. Because when we try to force what we think is right on other people, we really are acting from a place of, what would you call it? Superiority, thinking that our ideas are superior to someone else's. And so what we want to do instead is encourage people to turn within. There's a really big movement on this planet now, and I saw it at the Parliament of World's Religions. I heard it. A movement in all the different religions to realize that the kingdom of heaven is within. That's the Christian perspective. But whether it's Hinduism or the Muslim religion or whatever, there's a movement, and it's actually our younger people are bringing it forth. The idea of spirituality, they call themselves spiritual, not religious, because there's been an awareness that this idea of forcing dogma on other people is not right. That we all need to develop our own spirituality, our own connection with the divine by going within. One of the ways that we release the blind spots, and this is just a real typical one, a really practical one that we can use right away, is by telling the truth. Which means if you don't have an answer to something that somebody's asked you about, say, I'll look it up, or let's look it up together. Because pretending to know when we don't know is the blind leading the blind. Pretending to know when we don't know is the blind leading the blind. So staying in the question of life, the I don't know, is actually a beautiful spiritual practice to go in. There is actually something in us that does understand and does know. But when we go in with that with our heart open and our mind open to the mystery of life, that's when we can get those deeper questions answered for ourselves. So it's also important to remove or release the blind spots with the practice called forgiveness. And so let's begin by understanding this mechanism called projection. Anybody aware of projection? Yeah. So projection, what is that and how does that work? Well, it all begins with the awareness that we humans have a tendency for error, to make mistakes, to think, to make choices that aren't for the highest and best and that may affect others as well as ourselves. It's part of our human condition. And then what happens is our subconscious mind carries a burden of guilt for those mistakes. And then there's also the fear of punishment, particularly if we have been brought up with the idea of punishing God that is outside of us. And what I'm coming to understand, and I've been coming to understand, is the presence of the divine is really a matter of choices and consequences. Choices and consequences. We make a choice and we get the consequences of our choice. So guilt is actually a form of self-punishment. That's why we want to learn to release it. Many of the ways of releasing it are things like making amends and prayer and other powerful practices like that help to kind of wash away that sense of guilt. So there's a great need for all of humanity, for all of us, to feel forgiven and to feel right with God. To feel right with God, to feel right with each other. So again, let's continue on with how projection works. So again, we build up all of this guilt from the mistakes that we perceive that we've made. And then what happens is this tremendous burden of guilt that we want to get rid of. And this is an unconscious thing. So then there's a tendency to relieve ourselves of that burden of guilt by projecting the condemnation we feel towards ourselves onto others. So we begin to see others as that which we don't want to see in ourselves. And it can give you a sense of temporary relief. However, this is how the subconscious mind works. The subconscious mind knows only one. So when you are condemning another person, the subconscious mind thinks you're condemning yourself. So it's like when we condemn others, we are heaping even more guilt upon ourselves. Isn't that interesting? So the only way out is forgiveness. Forgiveness is the ultimate way, and that's why Jesus said, "Forgive, and it shall be forgiven." As we forgive others, we forgive ourselves. It's ultimately self-forgiveness because we are one. And Jesus was a great metaphysician. He understood this. He would remove the blocks and help people remove the blocks from their own consciousness, which was attention from the burden of guilt that showed up as things like paralysis. So when he forgave the man who was paralyzed, he did what? Anybody know what happened to him? He got up and walked, right. A release of the burden of guilt from this man. And the thing that's important to remember is that when we talk about Jesus, we're talking about a state of consciousness that we all have access to. It's called Christ consciousness. And so as we understand how this whole thing works, as we begin to remove the condemnation from our hearts toward others, toward ourselves, then we literally relax the body, allow grace to flow in us, through us, and as us, and we begin to see life more clearly, to see with the eyes of love. And how does this work? This works with willingness, a willingness to forgive. We don't have to know how to do it. We don't have to be experts in it, but just the willingness to forgive is really powerful. In Colin Tipping's work, Radical Forgiveness, he emphasizes that over and over again. It just takes a little willingness. And so Jesus, and this is what I was going to talk about before, in their final act, Gandhi and Jesus, before death, practiced forgiveness. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And Gandhi, when he was assassinated, just before, on his dying breath, made the sign of his hand of forgiveness. So that's forgiveness. We can also remove blind spots with gratefulness. So now we come into the season of Thanksgiving. And I love Brother David Stendal-Rost. I happened to listen to the audio that was in that series that Candace and the small group that Candace and Nancy Pace-Riches are leading. They are beautiful. We all have access to them just by going onto the Association for Global New Thought website. And it's beautiful. This brother, David Steindl-Rost, said, "The root of joy is gratefulness. It is not joy that makes us grateful. It is gratefulness that makes us joyful." And I like to think of joy as what grace feels like. Grace feels like. So gratefulness, then, he said, is an act of receiving that flow of grace. And as we're grateful and we begin to fill up, our heart fills up into overflowing, and then it spills out, he says, over our tongue, and we can't help but say, "Thank you." So that's the giving. That's, you see, the circulation, feeling grateful, and thank you, the giving back. Beautiful. Gratefulness. So he uses the word gratefulness instead of gratitude to just keep us in that experience of it. And he says, because everything we are given is a gift, the only appropriate attitude is gratefulness. And so here I'm going to reintroduce what I did a little earlier, is that we can be grateful for things that we enjoy, our breath, food, shelter, clothing, friends and family. And we can also, he said, be grateful in situations, and we were talking about the California fires, in situations because we can live in the questions, what is mine to do? What am I to learn from this? How am I to grow? When we use challenges in that way, then we can be grateful in that situation for the opportunities to grow in love, to grow in the divine nature that we are. There was a story of a nurse who saw between himself and the hospital a wall of fire, and he drove his white vehicle, like a truck sort of thing, through the fire to go and rescue the people who were in the hospital. And there was a photo of it, and I couldn't figure out a way to download it to give it to Dan, but it was he called it a marshmallow, a roasted marshmallow, his new vehicle, because it was white, and all the places where the fire had hit it on the sides looked like the color of a roasted marshmallow. And this man must have lived in the question, what is mine to do? What am I to do? And it was probably so instantaneous he didn't even realize it, but he knew he wanted to get through that fire and save those people in the hospital. And he did it. To me, that's such an example of divine grace, of living in grace, of living in that state of gratitude, of using that as an opportunity to do our part. So to come to a close here today, I just want to share the allegory that was written by Plato called The Cave. And in it, it has some people who are chained to the wall, facing the wall, and then behind them is the sun coming through the cave, and whatever shadows happen to go by, they see that. So that's their reality, is the shadows on the wall. And one day, one of them breaks free and goes out into the world and sees the beauty of the world and like, oh my gosh, I've got to go back and share this with them. Now, this is the moments when we become enlightened and see through the veil of illusion and into the realm of reality, and came back and wanted to share this. And they were all very suspicious because that's not what they saw. Don't allow yourselves to be one of those who remains chained and refuses to hear the words of wisdom and truth. Let us each be the ones who break free from the shadows, the blind spots, and are able to look beyond that and get out into the sun, into the world of ultimate reality, where we know that we are the individualized expressions of God, where we know that our way to freedom is through forgiveness, is through gratitude, is through self-inquiry, not immediately following the lead of others, but learning to think for ourselves. This is how we'll make the world a better place together. This is the way that we will emancipate ourselves from all discord. And so I invite you to join me in this week as we gather with friends and family and put this into practice. And so let's together say, yes, and so it is.